Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary. A few months ago, Devolver Digital released Devolver Tumble Time, a mobile game I'd been eager to play since its initial announcement. It's a fun, addictive little experience. However, it is a mobile game and as a result succumbs to the typical mobile game trappings. I've often found myself spending a huge portion of that experience watching ads, which only gets worse the further you progress. So, in order to get my Tumble Time fix without dealing with the mobile game experience, I've decided to make my own Tumble Time clone. But before we go any further, remember to leave a like if you enjoyed today's video and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Turn on those notifications so you don't miss future episodes, and with that said, let's get to the coding. Now first, a quick primer on Tumble Time. It's a simple physics-based match 3 game with the added ability to spin the play area known as tumbling. With enough tumbles, things shift around and allow for new or larger potential matches. Once time runs out, the player can either give up or earn extra time by using in-game currency or watching an ad. Now there's definitely a lot more to the game, but that's the basic gist of things. As we're moving to our clone, this is the final result, at least for now. It does a lot to copy and translate the Tumble Time experience to the desktop experience, and it's using gamemaker's built-in physics system. And also it's unfinished because otherwise this video wouldn't be released on time. Anyway, with that said, let's check out what's been coded. As always, our variables are pretty self-explanatory. Anytime we need to store information, we're using arrays, and a good example of that array usage is a particle effect used when players make a match. Now in Tumble Time, when a match is made, the icons kind of pop off and fall out of the view space. And instead of using objects, particles could do the same with less resources. However, it seems GameMaker doesn't allow you to use the same particle types and simply switch out the sprite used on generation. So an array was set up to basically clone the same properties for different particle types, with the only difference being the sprite used. An incredible waste of time and resources, but an apparent limitation with the engine. Anyway, we have one more particle system that's used during the Fever Time bonus. This one simply displays the burst of stars featured in the background. Now let's look at functions, starting with the spawn function. An amount check is made before spawning anything to make sure that we don't overflow the tumble area. GameMaker's physics system does the rest. And quickly, as an example of something I wasn't able to get to, there's a bomb/explosion function ready to go. It, just needs to be implemented, along with something that goes boom. The next two functions are conversions that help translate our individual icon objects into easier to use values for functions that require specific information. The function that follows is a search function that's used to prevent duplicates from appearing in our array data. And moving down the list, we've got functions that both begin and end the Fever Time bonus event. Now, to give context to the rest of our functions, let's check out the heart of our entire project, the ticker. First is the level timer, which also doubles as the fever timer. And since this is unfinished, nothing happens when the game time runs out. Next, we have the functionality for the namesake of the game, the tumble. For now, it's tied to a spacebar check, and when pressed, all toys in the tumbler have their IDs, a distance from the center of the tumbler, and angle recorded to an array. If the spacebar is held, that list is used to quote-unquote tumble the icons, aka toys, around like in Tumble Time, which is done by physically moving each toy based on their recorded values in the array. Now this is not how it's actually done in Tumble Time, but my limited knowledge of GameMaker's physics meant I needed to find an alternative method of tumbling the toys. And finally, when the spacebar is released, the array is reset and the toys are free to fall as they may. Now onto our cursor object, which we use primarily for collision purposes. When the player left clicks, a collision check is made for a toy. If one is found, that toy is set as our quote-unquote choice to attempt a match. That choice is also recorded to another array, and when that choice is made, a queue is automatically triggered. This queue runs through that current list of selected toys and performs another check. And the circle check function is basically a collision circle check. This checks for any nearby toys, and if any match their type, they are fed to the same quote-unquote choice array, and the search function is then used to make sure that no duplicates are added. This queue works in a way that each time a new entry is added to the array, it continues to spread outwards until all nearby matches are found. So when the player finally lets go of their left click, a pop function is triggered. That pop function takes that list that we've been populating and removes them from the play area. A particle featuring that same sprite is then spawned, replaced toys are spawned, and points are awarded. If the toy being removed matches the player's chosen toy, they're awarded points in their power meter. If fever time is not active, points are also awarded to the fever meter. And finally, general points are given to the player's score. Now again, I didn't have much time, so the player only has one power. So if the player has their power meter filled out, they can trigger the use power function, which will do a horizontal collision line check across the tumbler. Any toys touching that line populate an array, which is then popped the same way that matching does. And that's it. That's what powers this current iteration of my Devolver Tumble Time clone. However, I think the draw code for this one deserves a spotlight for how much was required to pull off the visuals for what looks on the surface to be so basic. Drawing is handled by a secondary object, and naturally during the fever phase, this is where our star particles are spawned. But what's more interesting is the layering for the project, which required two different surfaces and a whole bunch of masking. The first surface was necessary to create a quote-unquote cutout for the fever and power meters. Since they're not usual in shape and not simply rectangles, those meters needed to be drawn and then cropped via masking. That surface is then overlaid with another surface. This surface then crops the fever time stars from overlapping the tumbler and meters. The toys are then drawn over these surfaces, followed by a cap to obscure the spawning of said toys as they drop into the tumbler. And finally, this is drawn to the game with the rest of the data for score and whatever else we need on top of that. In other words, so much went into this clone that hopefully it's a lot clearer why I had to eventually stop, to make this video. In truth, there's a lot I'm not currently satisfied with, like the tumbler not working like tumble times. Also, gamemaker's collision detection gets a little weird between non-physics and physics-based objects. The scoring is also not accurate as I'm not sure of the actual details. And there's a few things like the highlight effect from tumble time that I'm not exactly sure how to code. Mostly because my current queue system is not technically recurring, so drawing something with point A to Z using the array data wouldn't work right. Regardless, I'm proud of what I was able to accomplish, especially with so little experience using gamemaker's physics, and I'd like to continue working on this one and add/expand on what's already been done, so we might see a part 2 sometime down the line. But for now, I would love to know what you thought of this little clone project, especially if you've played Tumble Time for yourself. And if you enjoy these videos and would like to help me keep making them, consider subscribing to my Patreon. Some of the perks include exclusive access to early video releases and games featured on the channel. But with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.